How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? We're going to stand up for our children. React. Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change!
It is almost unimaginable to think that somebody on a premeditated basis could go and do this. I think it's the most shocking thing that has happened in the country since the Dunblane massacre. I can't think of anything in the intervening years that has shocked people so much, that has led to quite a genuine outpouring of grief on a very, very large scale. TV presenters almost unable to hold back tears. That's how we all feel about this. There are some questions that are unanswered. A Telegraph report said that the man in question had been watched by the authorities. We don't know the truth of that. What we do know is we're told it's a non-terror incident. How should we define terror?
Well, we should define terror by anything attack on British civilization and the British culture and way of life.
So ideological.
I think that's one way to do it, yes.
So yeah, a third of Britons in 2019 thought Islam was a threat to the British way of life. That's about 20 million British adults. It's an astonishing large number of people, that.
I'm just asking questions because I'm struck that every time something appalling happens, we're told it's non-terror or it's mental health. There's nothing to worry our little heads about.
A 17-year-old boy from Banks has been charged with the murders of Bibi, Elsie Dot and Alice. 10 counts of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article following the tragic incident in Southport on Monday, the 29th of July. The 17-year-old cannot be named for legal reasons as he is under 18. We remind all concerned that criminal proceedings against the defendant are active and that he has a right to a fair trial. It is extremely important that there should be no reporting, commentary or sharing of information online which could in any way prejudice these proceedings.
Please grant me the time to tell the uncomfortable truth that I quite frankly have been sickened by listening to hand-wringing liberal media presenters throughout the day, encouraging people to phone and go, what's the cause of this? What's the cause of this? When anybody who is a keen follower and observer of social media and British society will be able to tell you. There is a creeping concern amongst a sizable minority of Britons who are worried about the increasing Islamification of Britain and also harbour huge concerns about uncontrolled migration.
What we do know is that the parents came from Rwanda, were let into the country as refugees at a time, of course, when those horrific massacres were going on between the two tribes. They settled in Cardiff. The young man was born in Cardiff and at the age of 6 moved up to the northwest. So we know that he was born in this country of refugee parents.
Conspiracy theories is central to this idea. Part of the narrative that was really important was that, of course, there was this fake news about this guy being a Muslim or somehow being an asylum seeker, but it was also that we're being lied to, and this populist idea that we're being lied to, and that's, as a result, you can't trust when the police say this person is not an Islamist, this person is not, the attacker is not a Muslim. They just discard that information. So conspiracy theories is at the heart of this as well.
Riots erupted on the streets of Southport last night, following a knife attack on Monday, which left 3 girls dead and other young children in a critical condition. Rioters gathered around a mosque not far from the scene of the stabbings. Vehicles were set alight and projectiles thrown at riot police by people believed to be supporters of the English Defence League. Residents trapped inside their homes watched the mayhem unfold from their windows. Some police officers were seriously injured with broken bones, lacerations and concussion. Northwest Ambulance Service treated 39 police officers, with 27 of them taken to hospital.
Asylum seeker,
Yes.
coming on a boat last year, said Ali Akbar. I mean, lies, the lies were...
Lies.
All the police made public about the attacker was that he was 17 years old and from Cardiff. Now, that's for legal reasons. Children can't be named. But it's not much information, and that's when misinformation floods the zone. The online speculation started pretty immediately on July the 29th, specifically anti-immigrant sentiment. You can see it here in terms of engagements on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's this big rise, and it continues for a long while. Now, one X account drove that conversation in particular. It generally deals in anti-immigrant sentiment, and it did so in this case in the afternoon of the attack, saying the attacker was alleged to be a Muslim immigrant. We know that is not the case. Now, this account is followed by Andrew Tate. Here he is, the controversial influencer, and later Tate posts this, calling the attacker an illegal migrant, again, completely incorrectly. And then there's this. It's a much more specific piece of misinformation. It gives a name which we don't think corresponds to anyone we've come across, and it takes on its own life.
Within moments of that horrifying attack happening on Monday, we started to see misinformation being spread by the far right. We started to see far right individuals spreading disinformation, especially essentially claiming that this was a Muslim, that it was maybe someone that had come over on a boat. Even fake names or false names were being circulated. And so we started to see a huge amount of energy within the far right, whipping up tensions, causing all sorts of problems. And very soon, by about 6 o'clock on Monday evening, we already started seeing calls for demonstrations, separate demonstrations to the very peaceful vigil that happened yesterday for a few hours later. And of course, we knew very early on that they were going to be targeting the mosque. Now, the people on the evening, in terms of who they are, that's a very, I mean, we're still going through the footage, of course, we are going clip by clip, but it was a range. Most of the people there had travelled from within the Merseyside region or some from within the Northwest, but there were figures that we're already picking up from very traditional far-right groups like Patriotic Alternative, or individuals within the orbit of Tommy Robinson that did travel some distances to go to the demonstration itself. So it's one of those difficult situations whereby it's too simplistic to say that this is groups of far-right activists that have been bussed in from around the country, but it's also not, it wasn't like a spontaneous local event either. The reason that we saw such misinformation about this person supposedly being a Muslim happen so quickly after the attack is because so many people on social media presumed that was the case. They are predisposed when they see this horrifying attack, this murderous attack on children. Well, this must be a Muslim. This must be an asylum seeker. This must be a migrant. And so that's one of the triggers that means that this misinformation spreads so quickly, is because people just retweet it without checking. They don't wait for the information because there's a presumption that there is the Muslim populace, it will be a Muslim. And as a result, that justifies in their minds, when there's this horrifying attack, to go and attack a mosque, because there is collective responsibility of the Muslim community in their eyes.
What should have been a moment of mourning and grief after the horrific murder of 3 little girls became a far-right riot. And you can see the aftermath of that riot in video footage. A mosque was targeted, bricks thrown, cars set on fire amidst anti-Muslim chants. online disinformation and misinformation that earlier spread false claims that the suspect was an asylum seeker, that he'd arrived recently on a boat, that he was Muslim. In actual fact, we know he's 17 years old, British born, and in the words of the BBC, has no known links to Islam. Because he's under 18, he can't be identified, but this has been presented as a conspiracy.
A huge protest has broken out in Hartlepool as demonstrators throw bricks at a line of riot police.
Axel Rudakabana was named and the reporting restrictions on his identity were lifted because he turns 18 in just 6 days. And the judge here said that the principal interest for lifting that restriction was that he would soon reach his majority and therefore would have all those restrictions lifted regardless. He also pointed towards much of the unrest that we've seen taking place across the country in recent days. Rioting last night, not only in London but also in Hartlepool and Manchester. The judge here saying, Mr. Justice Minari KC, saying that at least part of that rioting had been inspired by a vacuum of the facts where false information was being spread. He said this was nonsense and it needed to be challenged with the truth. Well, the truth is now that the suspect in this case, alleged to have committed 3 murders and 10 attempted murders and possession of an offensive sharp blade, is Axel Rudakabana.
Is this a crisis of the melting pot society, a crisis of multiculturalism?
100%. And it's, I tell you, look, I'm very angry. I speak about it a lot, about these illegal immigrants, what they get when they come here. We have poor people in this country that are struggling to feed their kids. Yet if you come over here on a dinghy, you get a free bed, you get free housing, you get free food, free healthcare, free travel. You get treated basically like a king. And yet we have got people doing 3 or 4 jobs that are struggling to feed their kids and they're getting nothing. And I do not trust this government, I didn't trust the last government, or the senior police in this country to protect me and my family or my community. And unfortunately, these poor officers that are on the front line today and yesterday are taking the brunt of anger.
This multiculturalism just simply doesn't work. Having unbridled immigration to this country, making no attempt to integrate people who come to this country, not teaching our children to be proud of who they are, teaching our children quite the opposite in many respects, saying that if you're white, you should be ashamed of yourselves, if you know, and so on. All these divisions that multiculturalism and the way that the regulations have been framed around it have created in our country are just deeply depressing, and I see no easy route out of it.
Now, of course, if he'd been a Muslim, it would have been no more acceptable to riot. Blaming the group for the actions of an individual is, of course, straightforward racism.
Insinuation, that line of, you know, is the truth being withheld from us? Not do we not know some of the answers to this, which we certainly don't, but is the truth being withheld from us? Is this person being monitored? Some people say they are. It's right out of the Trump playbook, and in my view, it makes Nigel Farage nothing better than a Tommy Robinson in a suit. It is beyond the pale to use a moment like this to spread your narrative and to spread your hatred, and we saw the results on Southport streets last night.
Now we are here in London, right by Downing Street, where protests are here again, where people are asking for more protection on knife crime, as well as potential links to far-right movements.
He's 17 years old and he's on your watch list.
You just mentioned that name. Merseyside Police has confirmed that is not the name of the suspect. But that's not the name of the suspect.
It's not the name of the suspect, really?
It's not.
Really?
Merseyside Police
well, then we're being lied to the police. out to the general public, the BBC, everybody else. We've been compulsively lied to.
What are you most angry
Other backgrounds now, they don't even like this country, so what are they doing over here? They're spreading hate.
What was it specifically about the Southport attack that upset you?
What do you think? For little girls, I've got kids.
What did you make of the riots yesterday in Southport, though?
It's right.
You think it was right?
Yeah, it should be right. If someone done that to my kids, I would kill every one of their family, and I don't give a and these lot here would all stand with me, because it's wrong.
I mean, yesterday was around 40 policemen that were injured.
Well, they should be on our side. They're
I mean, they were there to intervene with the attack on Monday.
They don't do nothing.
Did you watch Nigel Farage's video yesterday?
Yeah,
what did you think of it? Some said that he was inciting, escalation.
We need Nigel Farage in, we need Donald Trump in, we need people like that in. Anyone that tells the truth gets basically targeted as a far right.
Islamophobia is a very mainstream, respectable bigotry. So it's not surprising you get the most radicalized elements who are desperate every time anything happens to go. They're praying. You can see them. They're desperate for that person to be a Muslim, aren't they? They're just crossing everything.
Hugely right, and this context is central to understanding what's going on. And it reminds me a little bit of you might remember the Knowsley riot that happened last year, again outside accommodation, housing, asylum seekers. A lot of the focus around that was look at the misinformation and disinformation being spread. One of the questions though is, why do people believe it? Why is it that when people hear this fake news and this disinformation, do they presume that it's correct? And part of that has to be understanding the context in which societal Islamophobia, the normalization of racism and Islamophobia has become so prominent. The Conservative Party and the last government is a great example of that, but it's also huge sections of our political class, it's huge sections of our media class as well. And I think what's really important to understand here is that the far right, yes, we can focus on it, but we shouldn't make it a comforting thing. It's sometimes comforting to say these things happen because a small group of far right activists have been bussed in from somewhere and done this thing. The far right is not a tumour, a cancerous tumour that hangs off our body politic. And if we just lop it off, everything's fine. The far right is a gangrenous limb that is within the body politic, that is poisoning it, but also living off it. And I think it's really, really important to place that context in there.
When you've got people who have genuine concerns about the safety of their children, and we know that there has been a rise in violence. You can see videos from again and again where often it is involving migrants, some recent arrival of migrants. I mean, the stats are very clear when you look at violent assaults and sexual assaults across Europe, where you've had rivals from certain parts of the world, that you are seeing cultural differences, which are, well, we couldn't call it that, inverted commas, but actually attitudes to women, attitudes to violence, gang crime has erupted. I mean, off the scale in Sweden, Germany, Austria, France, Italy. It's not a coincidence, okay? And it's been happening here. Now, here's the thing. How do people having concern about the safety of their children, concerned about issues like mass uncontrolled immigration, concerned about illegal migrants, the boats coming over from Calais, how does that then get solved by people throwing bottles and bricks outside a mosque or at police in London?
And it doesn't get solved through such thuggery that I would never condone. But when people harbouring those concerns, and I, to a certain extent, harbour some concerns about the increasing Islamification of Britain. There, I've said it. When people harbour those concerns, but I won't throw bricks, then see politicians, senior police officers, harking on about social cohesion, it's broken this week, we know that, about the joys of multiculturalism, and that is not their experience.
The reason that so many people turned up at Tommy Robinson's demonstration, the reason that 4 million people voted for Nigel Farage and reform at the last general election, the reason that so many people listened to this fake news in Southport and decided to turn around and to target a mosque for no apparent reason, was because so much is the underlying Islamophobia that sits at the heart of this. And that's because you can read that Islamophobia in a mainstream newspaper, and we heard it from our Home Secretary in Parliament, and we hear it in things like GB News, The Spectator, The Telegraph, The Sun. It is that wider context that makes people believe the lies that are being spread online.
But when people question and wonder why Nigel Farage has such a following, it is precisely because he articulates what the rest of so many people outside the metropolitan elite are actually thinking.
So, I mean, as an example, a 2019 study, I'd be interested to see that updated, suggested 59% of newspaper stories relating to Muslims had negative themes. Mail on Sunday was the top of the pack, there was 78%. I mean, examples, Boris Johnson, when he compared the Muslim women wearing the veil to letterboxes and bank robberies, Islamophobic incidents surged by 375%. So these, and what you mentioned, The Spectator, Rod Liddell, for example, one of their star columnists wrote, "There's not enough Islamophobia in the Conservative." So that shows it's respectable. It's fanned by politicians and media outlets.